First stage fermentation is when the culture digests the caffeine and the sugar that's in the tea and ferments it to produce organic acids, amino acids, enzymes, and vitamins as byproducts. Every week I make a new batch of tea and I decant the current batch, so the liquid that's left in the jar. Depending on how thick your SCOBY is, you might need to wait a bit longer than a week or it might ferment faster. You can taste test it before you pour it off. So if it's really sweet, you might want to let it sit and ferment longer. If it has quite a vinegar taste, then it may have fermented too long. There's nothing wrong with this. It's honestly just a matter of your taste preference. So before you put your SCOBY in any jars, make sure that they're properly cleaned and sanitized. This is the cleaning sanitation method that I use. It's a bit overkill, but I had a contamination issue a couple of years ago. So I'm a bit paranoid and this is what I do. You can do what works for you. I also had an issue last year where some fruit flies got in through the cheesecloth on top and they laid eggs in the SCOBY, which is super gross. So now I use coffee filters and I just double them up instead of cheesecloth, and I haven't had any issues since then. I usually clean my main vessel, so my biggest jar, about every 2 to 4 months, just so that the balance of the bacteria and the yeast doesn't get out of whack. You'll notice how much yeast is in there. If you pick up your jar and you look at all the debris, kind of brown floaty stuff at the bottom, that's the yeast. So if you notice the yeast building up, you might just want to give your main vessel a good clean. Wash the jar with very little natural soap and some water. Rinse well with hot water and remove residue buildup at the bottom of the jar. Rinse it again with hot water 3 times and let it rinse through the tap or the spout if the jar has one. Fill the jar with hot water and vinegar. I add about ½ tablespoon and let it sit for a couple hours. And then rinse with hot water 2 times and let it air dry. In a big stainless steel pot, bring the water to a boil. Add the tea bags and turn off the burner. Let it cool for about 10 minutes or so, and then add the sugar and stir. Let the tea cool down completely. I've left the pot of tea on the stove covered for a full day sometimes when I'm really busy, and then I add it to the mother later and it's been completely fine. The main thing you want to make sure is that the tea cools down completely before you add it to the mother and that it doesn't get contaminated, so that's why leaving the lid on is a good idea. Remove your tea bags. You can do this earlier as well. I tend to leave them in because I like quite a strong green tea taste. The next step is adding your sweetened tea to your kombucha culture. So once the tea has fully cooled down, pour it into the kombucha jar with the mother and the starter liquid. This will be the liquid that's left over from the last batch. Be careful not to disturb the mother too much when you do this. You can get someone to hold the jar on an angle so that you can pour the tea in slowly without shaking up the mother. If the mother flips or folds, wash your hands very well and just readjust it so it sits evenly on top of the tea. If the SCOBY still sinks, don't worry about it. Cover with a thick cheesecloth or a coffee filter and then secure that with a rubber band. As I mentioned before, I like to use a coffee filter just because I had the fruit fly contamination in the past. And then place the jar in a dry, dark, and warm area where it won't be disturbed. Let it sit here for about 7 days. The longer you let it sit, the more acidic the tea will be and the less time it'll be sweeter. It's really just a personal preference.